Masechet Yoma, Daf Yod. We have some we're going to start with some Agadah, some geography, and the competition between Rome and Persia, and then we're going to get into some of the halachot about mezuzah. How is all this related to Yoma? Well, we started off talking about the place where the Kohen stays for 7 days and how it's called its name because there was a lot of turnover of Kohanim, and we talked about the corruption of the Kohanim, and that led to the discussion of why Shiloh was destroyed because of the sons of Eli who sinned, and then we went from there to destruction of the first Bet HaMikdash and second Bet HaMikdash. We ended off last time with the second Bet HaMikdash. If all the Jews had come back from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, would it have stayed? That's what Resh Lakish says. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Even if they all came back, it still would have been destroyed because Yaft Elohim liyefet v'yishkon b'haldei Hashem. The Shekhinah will only dwell in the tents of Shem, meaning like the first Bet HaMikdash was built by the Israelites, in that case Shlomo, or a future Bet HaMikdash that were built by the Jews. But the second Bet HaMikdash was built by Persia, and so therefore it was not destined to last. Now we have to talk about the connection between Yefet and Persia. So that's how we start. And from there, we're going to go into lots of genealogy and geography. How do you know that Yefet in the Pasuk is a reference to Persia, that the Persians are derivative from Yefet? Tichtib, Bnei Yefet, Gomer uMagog uMadai v'Yavan v'Tubal uMeshech v'Tiras. So in Bereshit chapter 10, it talks about the sons of Yefet and it lists them all. Okay, we're going to try to identify each one of them, even though for our purposes, we only need the last one, Tiras. So who's Gomer? Ze Germania. Well, that sounds like Germany, but it's not talking about Germany, but rather northern Assyria, place there with that name. Magog zo Candia. That's not Canada, but rather some of the Goths. That actually is like a Germanic tribe. Madai zo Macedonia. Okay, we know who that is. Macedonia, a country still around today, north of Greece, where Alexander the Great is from. Yavan kemashmao. Yavan, that's Greece, we know that. Tubal ze bet unaiki. So this is Bithynia area over here in north Turkey. Meshech ze zo Musia, which is north of Thrace, so over here. And Tiras, Peligi bad Bisima v'bad Rabbanan, Amri la Rabbi Simon v'Rabbanan. Chad amar zo bet teraiki v'chad amar zo paras. Okay, so we have a machloket. We're not sure if the machloket is between Rabbi Simai and Rabbanan, or Rabbi Simon and Rabbanan. Either way, one of them says it's talking about bet teraiki. That's Thrace, and the one before was Moesia, which is right above Thrace. I made a mistake. And the other opinion says it's talking about Persia. So at least according to one opinion, one of the children of Yefet is Persia. So that's why that was the basis of Rabbi Yochanan's derasha. Tana Rav Yosef Tiras zo paras. In fact, Rav Yosef confirmed it. All right, now that we're talking about different peoples, let's identify more people on the list in Bereshit Perek Yud. Savta v'ra'ama v'sabtecha. Tana Rav Yosef Sakistan Gavaita v'Sakistan Baraita. So these places refer to the inner and outer Sakistan. Okay, place around near Iran or Afghanistan now. Probably not to be confused with Kazakhstan, but one of those stands around there. Ben lechada lechada me'a parseh ve'kefa alfa parseh. And between each of them, these lands were so large. Between each of them was 100 parsangs, and the circumference was 1,000. So very large land areas. The continuation of Bereshit Perek Yud talks about Nimrod. Nimrod was a mighty ruler in the land, and it says the beginning of his kingdom were these places in Bavel. So what is that? Bavel Kemashma, that's Babylonia. Erech zo orichut. So that's just a place. Ve'achad ze baskad kalne ze nofer nifni. Okay, no additional information as to what these are in modern terms. Mina arisahi yasa Ashur, Taneh Rav Yosef Ashur ze silek. So from there came forth Ashur. Ashur is Syria. So Silek is what we know as Seleucia, a town that we know exactly where it is, and we have some remnants of it This is an arch that remains from the ancient city of Seleucia. Vayiben et Nineveh ve'et Rechobot Ayir ve'et Kalach. And so he built, also still about Nimrod, he built these cities. Nineveh k'mashma'o, Nineveh, the famous city. Rechobot Ayir, zo pirat Meshan, Kelach zo pirat Bur Sif. Okay, those are other cities. Ve'et Resen, ben Nineveh, ben Kalach, hi ha'ir ha'gedolah. So Resen is a city that's between Nineveh and between Kalach. It was a great city. So Resen is Ak Tesifon. We know that city, that's Tesifon. Sorry, this picture was Tesifon, not Seleucia, which I said before. So Tesifon was a very important city. It was actually the summer residence, summer capital of the Persians, at least during the Sasanian Empire later on. And in fact, Mechozat, the city of Rava, was a suburb of Tesifon. So the rabbis knew Tesifon very well. And that is, so that's Resen. When the pasuk says that it is a big city, what is it referring to? It says Resen is between these two other cities. So is the big city Resen, or is the big city Nineveh that is between? Or it could be Kalach, but it doesn't even mention that possibility. So we answer, Keshu omer v'Nineveh ta'ir gedolah Elohim mahalach sheloshet yamim haveh omer Nineveh hi ha'ir gedolah. Since in Yonah talks about Nineveh, describes it as the great big city, so now we know that in Bereshit also that big city is referring to Nineveh. All right, now that we're talking about identifications of places and famous people, we skip over to Bemidbar Yud Gimel. This is when we send the spies into the land, and when they come into the land, they find the giants, specifically in the city of Hebron. Vesham Achiman Sheshai Talmai Lideh Ha'anak. You have these three people that are the children of Ha'anak. Over here, they translated of Anak as if Anak is his name. The problem is you never put a Ha'yidiyah on a name, right? You never say the Joey. So Anak might just mean a common noun, meaning the children of a giant. In any case, assuming that these are brothers, the deoraita says, Tana, Achiman, Miyuman Sheba Achim, that these names, each of their names is actually a reference to some character trait of them. So Achiman, Achi, that's the brother, Man, Miyuman, meaning he's the most talented of all the brothers. Sheshai, Shemesimet Aris Kish Chitot. He was such a giant that when he stepped, he would make craters in the, like Bigfoot, right? Every time he stepped. It's not really clear how his name Sheshai comes from. Well, Shemesim Shritot, there's a couple of sheens there. Now she says, well, maybe it means like Shai. She was so heavy, he was as heavy as marble. And Talmai Shemesim Taris Telamim. Talmai was also so big and heavy that when he walked, he would make furrows, right? So you could they were like permanent pits in the ground that you could see. Davar acher, Achiman bana Anat, Sheshai bana Alush, Talmai bana Talbush. Or it could be a reference to hints of names of cities that they built. Sheshai has a shin, Alush, Talmai has a taf, that sounds like Talbush. Okay. In any case, Yelideh Ha'anak Shemanikin Achambam Bimkomatan doesn't mean that they were the children of the giant. How big were they? Well, Ha'anak could mean a giant, or it could also mean a necklace. They were so tall that they could wear the sun as a necklace. Fantastic. Okay, that is not relevant to this, but now we come back to Persia and Rome. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Amar Rabbi. This is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So Rabbi Rival, a first generation Amorah, says in his name, Atida Romi Shetipol Biyad Paras. Who's going to win, Rome or Persia? He says, Persia will defeat Rome. Shene'emar lachen shim'u asat Adonai asher ya'atz al Edom machshevotav asher chashav al yoshevet Teman im lo yischavum se'ireh hason im lo yasim alehem nevehem. So Yirmiyah says that, listen, what's going to happen to Edom and all of his plans and thoughts, and Yoshevet Teman, those who live in the south, that is Edom. Right, Edom is south of Israel, and Edom is a reference to Rome. So this is what's going to happen to Rome. Well, the youngest of the lambs will drag them away. So in other words, they look like they're so powerful. Nah, they're nothing. A little lamb will take them away. Who is Yirmiyah referring to when he is talking about the lamb? Well, he's referring to Persia, which we'll discuss in a second how he gets that. So this is a pasuk that he learns it from. I think it's quite interesting that the Yehuda Nasi, he's living under the Roman Empire. Okay, at this time, we're talking about the Roman Empire, and the Persian Empire now is the Sasanian empire. We're actually right on, by the time of Rabbi, it's the Sasanian Empire. From the Parthian Empire, it goes to the Sasanians. So the Persians and the Romans they're like constantly at war, pushing their border back and forth. There's always tension between them. So it's interesting that Rabbi, who is the head of the Jewish community, and in a way a liaison to the Roman Empire, is saying that Rome is going to fall, Persia is going to win. Okay, now Matkifla Rabbah bar Ola. So Rabbah questions this and says, "My mashma dehai se'ira son parasu tichtib ha'ayil asher ha'ita bal kanayim hu malche madai uparas ve'ma Yavan tichtib as-safir v'as-sa'ir melech Yavan." So he questions Rabbi's connection from the flock to Persia. Why do you think that the flock means Persia? Is it because in Daniel chapter 8, if you go read there, it's very interesting. Daniel describes this cosmic battle between an ayil, between a ram and a goat. The ram and the goat, they have at each other. One breaks the other's horns, and the horn sprouts new horns. It seems to be describing some of the Persian Greek wars back during the Achaemenid dynasty. In any case, who is this? Well, later on in the description, it says that the ayil is talking about Paras, and the ram is Paras, and the goat is Yavan. So he's asking, see, in Yirmiyah just says the flock. Flock means any small animals. It could refer to a ram or a goat. And so his question is, why do you assume that it's referring to the ram in Daniel's description, which is Persia? Maybe it's talking about Greece, and Greece is going to come and destroy Rome. So therefore, that's the question that he has against the B. But we're going to have an answer, because when Chaviva went from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, Rabbah was in Bavel, so he's questioning it. Interestingly, in Bavel, they're questioning whether Persia is going to win. The rabbi living in Persia says, I don't know if Persia is going to win. Who said that? And so when they go to Israel, and they said it in front of the sages, and the sages said to him, someone who doesn't know how to explain Pesukim is going to ask a challenge to the Yehuda Nasi. He doesn't know the midrash that we started off with today, that we had the sons of Yefet, the youngest of them. We said Rav Yosef is Persia. So when it says Sireh son, it's not a reference to Daniel. You're right, Daniel would be ambiguous. Rather, it's a reference to the children of Yefet, the youngest of the lambs, is a reference to the youngest of those sons, and that is Persia. The Yehuda Nasi knew what he was talking about. Okay, so that's his opinion, that Persia is going to win. Now we're going to second it. So this is also in the name of sages from the land of Israel under Roman Empire. They are agreeing and saying, Atida Romi shetipol biyad paras. Yes, Rome is going to fall in the hands of Persia. Persia will win. How do we know? Kal vachomer. The first Bet HaMikdash was built by us, Israelites, King Shlomo. So that makes it very strong. Shekhinah was there. And yet the Babylonians were able to destroy the first Bet HaMikdash. And the Babylonians themselves, naflu kastiyim biyad parsiim. The Persians were able to destroy the Babylonians. So you see how strong the Persians were, that they could destroy the Babylonians, who destroyed the first Bet HaMikdash, which was very strong. So Mikdash Sheni shebenu Parsiim ve'chiribuhu Romiyim, the second Bet HaMikdash, which the Persians built, and it didn't have Shekhinah, it wasn't so strong, and therefore the Romans were able to conquer it. And Odin Shipalu Romiyim beyad Parsiim, all the more so that the Persians will be able to conquer the Romans, right? The Persians are so strong, they could defeat those who destroyed the first Bet HaMikdash, or the more so, they could defeat those who destroyed the second Bet HaMikdash. Okay, it's very interesting to have a Kavach Omed regarding historical events, right? As if you could make a logical connection. Kavach Omed is really supposed to be a method of deriving laws from the Torah. This one is a bit weak. First of all, because actually the Persian Empire, they both called the Persian Empire, the Achaemenid dynasty was actually completely different from the Sasanian dynasty. They just called themselves like the ancient Persians to give themselves authority. Okay, in any case, he agrees that in fact Persia is going to win. And both of all these sages so far were in Rome, and they thought Rome was going to lose. Here's where it gets interesting. Amar Rav Atida Paras Shetipol Biyad Romi. Rav, who is actually from Bavel, says no, Persia is going to lose and Rome is going to win. So the rabbi in Persia thinks Rome is going. I guess the grass is always greener wherever they are. They're like, oh, our rulers, our empire is the worst. We hope they get destroyed. Amru le Rav Kahana v'Rav Aseh le Rav. Banoye beyad satore. So Rav Kahana asks Rav, does it make sense? Those who built it should be defeated by those who destroyed the Bet HaMikdash. The Persians are good people. They built the Bet HaMikdash. Why should they lose to the Romans who destroyed the Bet HaMikdash? Right? They don't deserve it. Amar lehu in gezerat melechi. Yes, that's the way it is, and that's God's decree. It should be so. You think the Persians are so great? The Persians destroyed Batei Knesiyot. Not sure what this is referring to. We do know of an incident in an Elephantine island in the middle of the Nile, that there was a Jewish temple there that was destroyed by Persian priests. Could be referring to that. We know that there was always a lot of tension between Zoroastrians and Jews. There could have during that been destruction of synagogues. So the Persians are not so great either, and so yes, they deserve to be destroyed. And we actually have an braita that proves Rav's point. Atida parashit tipol biyad Romi, right? Rome is going to win. Hada de satre bechinishta. First, because the Persians destroyed Batei Knesiyot. Ve'od gezerat medechu shipelu biyad bonin biyad sotrin. And that's the gezerat. That's what God said. That those who built it should fall before those who destroy it. Tamar Yehuda Marav and Ben David Ba'ad shetifshot malchut Romi harsha'a bechol ha'olam kulo tisha chodashim. That the Mashiach will not come until the Roman Empire spreads out throughout the whole world for 9 months. So really, it's good if Rome wins, right? Because if Rome wins and takes over the world, we'll know that 9 months later Mashiach will come. Why 9 months? שנאמר לכן יתנם עד עת יולדה ילדה ויתר אחיו ישובון על בני ישראל. Because Micha said, God will give them up until she who is to bear is born. We talk about Chevle Mashiach, right? The birth pangs of Mashiach. I mean, usually we think as kind of as a metaphor that there's difficult times before there's good times. You have to, win the war of independence before you can have a state. But he's taking it more literally, actually 9 months of pregnancy, and then the people will be born. Okay, so it's very interesting. They're kind of trying to predict. They're writing this in the 3rd, 4th century and trying to predict who's going to win between Persia and Rome. We now know from hindsight what happened. Neither, actually. Rome was split into two, and the Eastern Byzantine Empire lasted all the way until the 1400s, till the Ottomans took over. So Rome lasted a very long time, but they did not conquer the Persians. The Persians lasted until the 600s when the Muslims conquered Persia. So I guess you could say, I don't know, Rome was actually divided. The Roman Empire was divided earlier. So in that sense, Persia won, but half of it did last. And Persia was defeated before the Byzantine Empire was defeated. So I'm not sure which of these opinions win. I guess they only saw these two great superpowers and couldn't imagine other events happening yet. All right. or maybe we're still going. We see the Western the Western world. Maybe you could call the Roman Empire against Iran, who is still around, being the Persian Empire, and these are current events. So we'll see what happens. Okay, tenor Rabbanan. Now we're going to go back into halacha and talk about the mezuzah. Kol leshachot, still it's all related to this lishkat Parhedrin chamber that the Kohen Gadol stayed in for 7 days. Kol leshachot b'mikdash lo hayu lahen mezuzah chus milishkat Parhedrin shaya ba bet dira lekohen Gadol. So there were many chambers throughout in the Bet HaMikdash, and none of them had a mezuzah except for this Lishkat Parhedrin, because the Kohen Gadol would sleep there. The other ones, most of them were for storing wood or oil or other things, and so because this was used as residence, it needed to have a mezuzah. That's the first opinion. Amar Rabbi Yehuda v'halo kama leshachot hayu b'mikdash haya lahen bet dira v'lo haya lahen mezuzah. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says no, Lishkat Parhedrin did not have a mezuzah, and in fact there were many different places where people slept, places of residence. For example, the guards in the Bet HaMikdash, the Leviim who were there, right? There were things getting burned all night, so there were people that were staying in the Bet HaMikdash day and night, and they didn't have mezuzot either. So in fact, not them, nowhere in the Bet HaMikdash did they require a mezuzah. So that's the fundamental machloket. They have a couple of words here that are difficult. Ela lishkat parhedrin gezerah heta. Rather, the reason he agreed, according to this, Yehuda agrees, there was a mezuzah in lishkat parhedrin, but it wasn't required deoraita. It was only a gezerah. Okay, I want to try to read this as if these words aren't there. For several reasons. First of all, anytime you see the word gezerah, we do this like as a Rabbanan gezerah just in case. All gezerah is always found in the Talmud Bavli, and whenever you look at the parallel in the Talmud Yerushalmi or in Tannaitic sources, they don't give a reason as a gezerah. Okay, so a gezerah is almost always only in the Talmud Bavli, and this is a deoraita. So it'll be surprising to find a gezerah in a deoraita. So therefore, I suspect that this is not part of the original deoraita. Or rather, this is going to make sense in a few minutes. We're going to see 3 interpretations of this, and the last one, in the name of Rava, will say it's a gezerah. So I think these words are added on here in anticipation of what Rava will say in a minute. And furthermore, if you look at the manuscripts here, you see this is the line we're dealing with. That does appear in almost all the manuscripts except for these 2. These 2 are the Yemenite manuscripts, which are always very, very important to look at. The Yemenites preserved very good readings, and here it does not have this gezerah. It just says instead, kol shi bet dira chayev mezuzah. If it's a residence, it requires mezuzah, otherwise not. And it doesn't say anything about a gezerah. So therefore, I think that these words, either the Yemenites had this or they interpreted it, with the same intuition that I just mentioned. So let's leave out those words for now. Question?
Yeah. Is it the rule that you're only supposed to have a mezuzah if it's a residence?
Yes, that's the rule.
So how come we have mezuzot everywhere, like a school, whatever?
Right. So actually, I was going to end with this point, which is like a Bet Knesset does not require a mezuzah. We put them just as a custom because it looks weird if there's no. But technically, if it's not a residence, it does not require a mezuzah. Okay, the questions come up like a garage, and there's all kinds of other things. We tend to just put a mezuzah. There's no downside to putting a mezuzah unless it's a disgusting place or a bathroom. Then it's not respectful. But otherwise, we put mezuzot even where we don't actually technically need to. Okay, so now we have a machloket, right? The first opinion says yes, Mishkat Parhedrin was a residence and there was a mezuzah. The Yehuda says no. The question is why not? My tamad Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rava. So in the first printing, it says Rava. In the current Vilna, it's changed to Rabbah. Well, let's check it out for ourselves. Again, here are all the manuscripts, and here is that word. Rava appears in almost all manuscripts, except for here, this one, Munich 6 has Rabbah. Munich 6 is a good early manuscript. And also these last 2. The last one is a Geniza fragment from the about 1200s. So Geniza fragment is always very reliable. And this one, Kassel, is a city in Germany. This is actually from a book binding. Christians, they would deface Jewish books rather than throw them out. They're after leather, after all. They would use Hebrew books to bind their own books, and which is not very nice of them, but lucky for us, they are preserved. And so in recent decades, people have been cutting open those book bindings and finding manuscripts of the Talmud. So in that book binding, amazingly, it has the word Rabbah. And so we do have three good manuscripts. I say Rabbah rather than Rava. Rabbah is a third generation Amora. Rava was his student. And over here, it makes much more sense to say Rabbah and not Rava, because we're going to see three explanations. The first by Rabbah, then Abaye, and then Rava. So if Rava is saying the first one, he can't really also say the third one, unless he's changing his mind. But it makes more sense to say Rabbah. Okay, Kasavar, Rabbi Yehuda, kol bayit she'eno asur limot hachama v'limot hageshamim eno bayit. So according to this, Rabbi Yehuda says, in order for a house to require mezuzah, you have to live in it all year round. If it's only for the summer residence or only built as a winter residence, then no good. And this one, it's only for 2 days, so 7 days. So therefore, it does not require a mezuzah. Okay, so that I guess would make sense. That would explain it. However, we're going to have two challenges from Abaye, his student. Itibe Abaye. This is a pasuk from Amos, when Hashem says, I'm going to wreck the winter place and the summer place, the ivory palaces shall be demolished. Okay, Amos is railing against the tremendous materialism of some people that had to have a summer house and a winter house. Can you imagine such a thing? Okay, for those who don't have a summer house, now you could feel better about it. So no, probably is talking about the royalty who have ssummer palaces and ivory and all that. And so they're evil, so they will be destroyed for it. And anyway, since she says, Bayit betach, even though it's only used in the winter, it's still called a house, still called a residence, and therefore should require a mezuzah. So he could answer, Amaleh, Rabbah answers, Bet chodef or bet kais ikre, bait setamala ikre. Yeah, exactly. You always need an adjective with it. It's a summer home or winter home, not just a home, right? So the fact that you're adding adjective means it's not really a true residence if it's not used all year round. So, okay, he backs it up, answers that question. Itibe, Abaye, another question. And this question is from a Mishnah in Masechet Ma'asrot. Masukat hechag behag. Rabbi Yehuda mechayev hachamim poterim. V'tani ala Rabbi Yehuda mechayev be'aruv u'bemezuzah u'bema'aser. Sukkah, we're talking about Sukkah on the holiday of Sukkot. What is its status? Is it considered a residence or not? Rabbi Yehuda says, yes, it is a residence. This is the opposite of what he just said above. And Chachamim say, no, it's not a residence. Now, for what purpose are they arguing about? This is in Masechet Ma'asrot. So actually, we're talking about Ma'aser. One of the laws of Ma'aser is when you cut grain in the field, you can still snack on it, eat it temporarily, even before you take Terumah and Ma'aser. However, once you bring it into your home, then it's fully chayav into the masrot. You cannot even snack on it without taking to the ma'aser. But it's only if you take it into your residence. So what's considered residence? What if it's Sukkot and I bring it into my Sukkah? That's what they're talking about. That the Rabbi Yehuda says, yes, Sukkah is considered a full residence. Chachamim say no. They also argue regarding Eruv. If we have many houses, together that share a courtyard, I cannot carry in the courtyard or from one home to the other unless all the residences of the courtyard contribute a common meal called the Eruv. What if someone just living in a little tent? That's a temporary thing. No, that doesn't count. They don't have to join the Eruv. What about a Sukkah for 7 days? So that's also part of the machloket. The Yehuda says yes, they would have to contribute to the Eruv, otherwise nobody can carry, and Chachamim say no. And lastly, for mezuzah, here the Yehuda says yes, you have to put a mezuzah, and Chachamim say no. So now we have a challenge, because you just told me that something that is not used all year round is not considered a residence, according to the Yehuda, is not considered a residence and doesn't need a mezuzah. But we have a Mishnah and a deoraita with it that says, according to the same Rabbi Yehuda, that a sukkah is for 7 days during the holiday, is a residence and does require a mezuzah. So there's some problem here. And maybe you'll say, when he said it's chayav in this deoraita, he meant chayav midrabanan, but not deoraita. And in the source above here, this deoraita above, he's talking about midrabanan. Midoraita you don't, midrabanan you need. But you can't say that. I'll tell you why, because included in this list is ma'ased. For those two, you can say require midrabanan. There's no downside. Would you require him to bring ma'ased midrabanan, even if he doesn't actually have to? You can get into trouble if you do that. If the rabbis are going to be stringent and say you have to bring ma'ased from this midrabanan, even though it's not really a residence, but we're going to require it, then the person's going to think he has to bring it midoraita. And then he'll take, if you have 2 piles of grain, you can take ma'aseh from one and say, I have in mind, this will be for the other also. And if it's only required midrabanan, then you're taking from something that doesn't require ma'aseh and using it to allow you to eat something that does require ma'aseh midoraita. And then it doesn't work. You have to take from equal status. And so you might end up actually getting tripped up by making it a drabanan. So therefore, it doesn't make sense as a drabanan, and he rejects that opinion. So I'll show you this in the outline here. We have, according to the sages, the Parhedrin requires a mezuzah, the Sukkah does not. The Yehuda says the opposite. Parhedrin does not require mezuzah, certainly not deoraita, and the Sukkah does require mezuzah. So we got to explain this. So Rabbah's, there's the first answer says, listen, the Parhedrin is not lived in all year round. So if it's not lived in all year round, it does not require a mezuzah. Good, that explains, I put the Yehuda in red. But Sukkah is not lived in all year round, and yet he says it does require a mezuzah, and the Rabbah provides no explanation. So therefore, we come to the second explanation of Abaye. Ela amar Abaye, beshiv'ah de kule alma la pelige de mechayeva, ki pelige b'sha'ar yemot hashana. Actually, that deoraita above, where the Yehuda said it does not require a mezuzah, he meant that was talking about the rest of the year. During the actual 7 days when the Kohen Gadol is living there, everyone agrees that it is required. Midoraita, even the Yehuda would agree, yes, it is in fact required. The machlok is only about the rest of the year. That's what this was talking about, no mezuzah. So he's actually really very much reinterpreting. It's a kind of radical reinterpretation of this deoraita. But all right, so let's see if it works. Rabbanan savre ki azrinan she'ar yemot hashana atu shiva, but Yehuda sabar lo gazrinan. So the rabbis say, yes, you require a mezuzah on the Parhedrin chamber all year round. Gezerah. If you require it only for those 7 days, what's going to happen? You're going to forget to put it up. Who's going to be in charge of remembering to put up the mezuzah, take it down? So therefore, he says midrabanan is required to leave it up all year round. And the Rebbe Yehuda says, no, you don't make a gezerah. There's someone in charge. There's the kohanim. They'll be diligent about it, and so you could just put it up for those 7 days when he's there, and does not require it all year round. You see, according to this, it's specifically the Yehuda who does not make a gezerah. That's why I think those words in the before that I made orange are not original to the deoraita. Okay, so that would help explain it. Does it? Let's answer all the questions. Let's see. Amar le Rava, v'asukkah tehag behag katane. Wait, the other Mishnah in Ma'asrot is talking about the Sukkah of the holiday on the holiday. So let's now compare it right back to here. So let's see, the Yehuda by himself, he actually does require a mezuzah in the Parhedrin for 7 days, and he does require it in the Sukkah for 7 days that you're staying. So the Yehuda is consistent. But now you create a problem for the sages, because the sages who say you do require in the Parhedrin, even though he's only living there for 7 days, why would they say that you don't need it in a Sukkah for 7 days, right? We're talking about the Sukkah that you are living in during the holiday. And so this is not explainable according to Abaye. Therefore, Rava introduces a third and last explanation. Ela amar Rava, bishari mot hashana kule amala peligi de petura. Really going back to kind of the simpler explanation, although here also not exactly the Peshat maybe. He says all year round, everyone agrees that the Parhedrin does not require. Nobody's living there during the rest of the year, so it's not required. Only during the 7 days when the Kohen Gadol is staying there before Yom Kippur, that's when there is a machloket. And each context has its own explanation to explain why they reversed opinions. What is the explanation? Sukkah tama lechud, Rabbi Yehuda letameh, Amar Sukkah dirat keva ba'inan, umechayeva bimzuzah. Oh, Rabbi Yehuda, if anybody ever learned the first Mishnah in Masechet Sukkah, you'll remember, it talks about how high can a Sukkah be. So the maximum height is 20 amot, according to the rabbis, because to make something 30 feet high, you're going to have to make a very strong structure that's going to be like a permanent structure. So the rabbis say, sages say it's no good. The Yehuda over there says even more than 20 amot. You can make it as high as you want, even though that means that the walls are going to be made out of reinforced steel. And nevertheless, he says you can build a sukkah in a way that's a dirat keva, as a permanent dwelling. So since the Yehuda is the one that says a sukkah can be built as a permanent dwelling, therefore it requires a mezuzah. And it's the sages against the Yehuda who say, no, a sukkah must be built in a temporary way, it can't be built with such strong material, it can't be so tall. So they consider it a temporary dwelling, it's just a tent. If you go camping for a couple of nights, you don't have to put a mezuzah. So now we understand the context of Mishnah Ma'asrot. ולשכה טעמה לחוד. רבנן סברי דירה בעל כורחה שמהדירה. ורבי יהודה סבר דירה בעל כורחה לה שמהדירה. This is a different issue that they're talking about. The Kohen Gadol on these 7 days, he has to stay there. They force him. It's like as if he's in jail, right? He has to stay in the Parhedrin. And so what is that considered? If you have to be somewhere and you don't want to be there, is that considered a residence? If you're in jail, do you have to say, oh, I have a right to get a mezuzah in my jail cell, right? Even though you really don't want to be there. So Rabbanan say a forced dwelling is considered a dwelling. And therefore, you need a mezuzah in the Parhedrin chamber. Rabbi Yehuda says a forced dwelling is not considered dwelling, and therefore you do not require a mezuzah. Nevertheless, the rabbis instituted and said, let's put a mezuzah there anyway. Because if you don't put a mezuzah, people will say, why is there no mezuzah? Oh, because he has to be there. He's like jailed up in there. And that won't look very nice. So let's put a mezuzah so that way it looks like a proper residence, as if that he really wants to be in. And so therefore, to sum up, Rava says the Parhedrin is required. Parhedrin is not required because it's forced living. So that's deoraita. Midrabanan, you do require it. So this is Rava's words, I think, that were tacked on to that original baraita. And whereas a sukkah is built as a permanent structure. So yes, a sukkah does need it. And the sages say the other way around. A sukkah is a temporary structure, so that does not require a mezuzah. And the Parhedrin, although it's forcible residence is considered. Last point is that although a sukkah, we have a mitzvah to stay in it. So you might say a sukkah is also a forcible residence. It's still not quite the same, right? We have a mitzvah. We want to, we enjoy it. No, and they're not actually forcing us to stay in it. So that's why, according to that opinion, the Yehuda will still say it does require a mezuzah. And this has a lot of relevance for halacha l'maaseh, that nowadays our small bet mikdash, our batei knesiyot, do not technically require a mezuzah, but we do put them there customarily anyway. And actually, we'll continue some of these halachot tomorrow. Baruch Adonai L'olam, amen ve'amen.